Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone is doing well this morning. Thank you for joining us for yet one more webinar. Our webinar today is It's Time, What to Consider When Bringing Employees Back to Work. Now, before we get started, I want to just review a couple of quick tech tips to go over with you. First, I want to keep in mind that we will be keeping people on mute for the entire of this webinar. But if you click on the participants button, you can see who's on the call. You can also use the Q&A area to ask questions, and we will get to those questions right after we finish with the presentation. The chat feature is not being monitored, but if you want to use it, by all means, feel free. And this webinar is also being recorded and will be emailed to you as a copy of the presentation slides, and a copy is also going to be available on our webpage later on this afternoon. Also want to give you a very quick disclaimer as well, just to point out that this presentation is focused on the HR considerations to bringing people back to work within the BC jurisdiction. While much of the content is applicable no matter where your jurisdiction is, I do want you to keep that in mind. And also that this presentation is provided as a free service to those in attendance and to anyone who views the recording. As an HR professional service firm, the information provided today is not legal advice and should not be construed as such. I also want to talk to you about how we can help. Our organization, Engaged HR, we provide HR on-demand services such as pay-as-you-go model, email for appointment if you want to learn more. Our COVID page is also an amazing resource. Welcome you to check it out online at engagehr.com/COVID-19. And we also have a couple of other free webinars upcoming, one on May 14th, the new workplace. You're living in it. It's going to discuss managing employee well-being. And on May 21st, well, actually I believe that's a typo, it should be May 26th, navigating a new workplace as a not-for-profit organization. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at engagedhr.com. You can also watch more information from us on our social media channels, and you can also read many of our relevant blogs on the same webpage, engagedhr.com/blogs. Before we get started, I want to take a quick poll of all the people who are in attendance this morning. So you will see a quick pop-up pop in front of your screen asking you a very brief question. If you don't mind taking a few moments to just respond very quickly, that would be very much appreciated. I'm going to make it available right now. I'm going to keep this poll up for about 60 seconds or so. I'm getting lots of responses already, which is great. Very much appreciated. Give a few more seconds for people to respond. I see we got 60 out of 67 individuals have already responded. Three. Just 5 more seconds, and then we'll end the polling and we'll continue with our webinar. Thank you all very much. Much appreciate you participating in this quick little pop-up poll. And now I wanted to move on to the topic of our presentation and introduce Denise Lloyd, who is the founder and CEO of Engaged HR. Those of you who know Denise is the founder and CEO of Engaged HR and has been in human resources field for over 25 years. She has a wide array of leadership experience, including founding Engaged HR, which serves over 300 organizations right across Canada. Denise's innovative and solution-focused approach creates great places to work. Denise holds a Master of Arts in Leadership from Royal Roads University and the prestigious designation of Fellow Chartered Professional in Human Resources. And now, I want to turn it over to Denise, who will be walking you through our agenda and the topic of our conversation. Denise?
Great, thanks, Ari. So welcome, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here today to talk to you about returning people back to work in these crazy times. I am going to ask Ari whether you have the ability to show the results of our poll, because I'd love to know just some of the breakdowns of the people on the call today, kind of what our numbers are like in terms of the size of your workplace.
Absolutely. I'm just going to
Regardless
share
of the
this
size, we're going to talk about a number of different
Denise,
things.
that your audio is a little bit low. I'm going to share the results right now, and you can see there's about 12 or 19% who have 0 to 10 number of employees. 30%, the bulk of the group, is small businesses, 11 to 50 employees. 27%, so nearly the same amount, are 51 to 100. 5% are 100 to 150, and about 19% of attendees today are working for organizations with 150 employees or more. So thank you all for participating. Denise?
That's great. So what I'm hoping you'll find is that the relevance of the conversation that we are going to have today is the same for you. There's lots of different considerations, and some of the larger size organizations will have potentially different considerations, but all the same foundations will be there. COVID is a disease that's affecting us regardless of the size of our organization. So we'll talk a little bit about all of it and how it relates. So I just want to give you a quick overview of our agenda. We're going to talk about COVID-19 and some of the core components of that disease and the virus and what that means. We'll talk about workforce planning, creating safety, both physical and psychological safety. And then I want to just wrap up at the end with a bit about business continuity and sustainability, as we are in the beginning phases of a number of months associated with the pandemic. So let's talk about COVID-19. This is not an unusual amount of information for you. People are aware of COVID-19. You'd be living under a rock if you weren't aware. The symptoms include coughing, sore throat, shortness of breath, and fever. At the core, there's other symptoms that are not as prevalent, but these are the main ones. And they can range from mild to severe and can appear for up to 14 days after exposure. So I highlight these points in particular because I want you to keep that in mind. What are the symptoms? But also, what does transmission mean? So the virus is transferred by infected droplets coming into contact with our face, our eyes, nose, and mouth, through close contact with other people or touching contaminated surfaces or people. So when we think about these things, you're going to see a thread about this as we go through the presentation today. Now, the first thing to keep in mind is if people are sick, they should not be at work. If we are sick, we should not be going out. We should be staying home. We need to shift our culture around powering through and going to work even if we're sick. Those days are over. If you are exhibiting symptoms or if you are ill, you need to stay home. So as employers, we need to start dealing with the sick leave component in this, the issue of people coming to work sick. We need to deal with that head on. So we need to educate on what people should do if they are ill. So you might have posters around explaining how to address it. Who do you email? Who do you call? How do you report in ill? You should also email it to them so everyone can be at home and be able to look up that phone number. They shouldn't have to be at work to see the poster. And you need to reiterate it and model it. So if you've got a senior team, a leadership team, if they're not feeling well, they need to stay home. This is assuming, of course, that you've brought people back to work. We also have to think about removing the barriers to calling in sick. So taking a look at our sick pay policies and our leave policies. We're going to talk more about that in the course of the webinar, but it's something that is top of mind for everyone. We don't call in sick if it means we don't get paid. So how do we deal with that? So by the end of the webinar, we'll have some more information on that. So COVID-19, what does it all mean and where to from here? We've been thrown into a state of uncertainty and it's changed our workplace in a lot of ways and things are shifting. And so we have to look at, well, what does that mean? We went into shutdown mode or lockdown mode or stayed home as much as we could if we were in a work environment that allowed for that. If you're in an essential service, obviously you've continued to work in some way, shape, or form. So if you're in an environment where it's time to, you've got people on layoff and it's time to bring them back to work, as we've been told by the government, so how do you do that? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to look at your workforce plan. And you need to know, what are you planning for? Are you planning to bring people back into the workplace and actually have them work? Or are you looking at a leave with pay because you qualified for the wage subsidy? So you're bringing people back to work, so to speak, and then you're putting them on leave with pay. So it's a paperwork exercise. You're not asking people to come into a building. You're not asking people to come to work, but you're putting them back on payroll, perhaps so that you can then qualify for a wage subsidy. Or you might be in a situation where you're doing a combination of the two. You've got some people coming back and they're going to work and they're coming into the workplace every day, and some people are staying home and they're on leave with pay because the work they're not able to do it, either coming back to work or working from home. So you need to do some planning, and you need to really understand what are you exactly asking of your team. Now you need to decide who to recall. You can bring people back. Employees don't have a right to recall, but employers have the choice. If you recall, you want to make sure that you're doing so on really objective and non-discriminatory criteria. You want to connect the skills you need to the work that's necessary. And you also, this is a time to be strategic. You want to think about what are the skills you need for today, but also what are the skills you want to retain and keep for your future? And what are skills that you don't need anymore? And you need to be strategic in that. Now, if you're calling people back from a layoff, just a note that people have probably heard this already, the temporary layoff period in BC has been extended to 16 weeks. So 16 weeks from the date of your layoff period for staff. So it was originally 13, it's been extended. So we've added 3 more weeks to the window. Now, you have a variety of scenarios for calling people off of layoff. So you might call everybody back full-time, back to FTE, back to their regular salary, business as usual, so to speak. You might recall only those that meet your specific criteria, and you might have a phased approach where, phase 1 is this, or these types of people, phase 2 is this, phase 3 is that. You can set it out over a number of months if you need to. You can recall and reduce pay, but there are risks associated with changing the terms and conditions of a team member. So you don't want to change things too dramatically. You want to document the why on why the change is available or necessary, and you want to make it temporary in order to avoid some of the other employment law risks that you're taking there. And you can also recall and pay retroactive salary if it would help qualify for previous periods of the subsidy. There's a number of things you want to pay attention to with that, but it is possible to do that. So the first thing you need to do before you do anything else is figure out who's coming back to work and what does back to work look like. Because you're now open for business. You've made your decisions, people are coming back to work. So now let's talk about, well, now what? Because if you've got people on leave at home, things look very different. Your obligations are a lot less, but if you're bringing people into your physical space, you have some planning to do. So let's plan the comeback. My suggestion is the first thing you need to do is you need to set up what people are referring to as a task force. And this could just be you and one other person, or it could be your entire leadership team. It can be, depending on the size of your organization, it can be big or little. It should not, however, be just you. Because you need, throughout everything you're doing right now, you need to think about what if you get sick. If you're the HR person responsible for these decisions, what if you get sick? You need to have a backup plan. So you need to have at least a team of 2. It's really helpful if you have staggering shifts and you're managing building access for your task force to be multidisciplinary across your organization, so that if somebody's planning for their team to come back to work, in production, you don't have the marketing team also coming in where you thought you had 10 people, now you have 20. So you want to be really communicative with your task force. Make sure that if you do have a joint health and safety committee, you are continuing the model under WorkSafe of that being joint staff representatives of the workers as well as in management. So you want to maintain the integrity of that relationship. Now, as you're planning your comeback, what you're going to do, and this is where we're going to spend a big chunk of our time today, is you want to conduct a risk assessment and create a plan. And that plan that you're creating is what has been talked a lot in the media and with Dr. Henry and Minister Dix, is about creating a plan and having a plan available. So that's what we're talking about today. So spoiler alert, start ordering your cleaning supplies, your PPE. You want to start all of that now, because you know you're going to need, at least, if nothing else, you know you need to clean. So you may as well start ordering supplies now because they are hard to get. And then throughout this presentation, I just want you to remember that you're going to document everything. You're going to communicate way more than you've ever communicated before, and you're going to train people, and you're going to talk to them about what you're doing. So what does it mean to assess risk and create a plan? One of the things I want you to think about is that the COVID and what we're trying to protect ourselves from is transmission. So if you think about what transmission comes from two places: people and surfaces. So as you think about your areas of risk, you need to figure out what areas of risk exist in your organization where there's high risk of a lot of people and a lot of transmission through contact with surfaces. If you think about that, so for example, your manufacturing floor might be a higher risk than your storage rooms because not a lot of people go in there. You're wanting to assign your levels of risk, and assign a level of priority so that, start with the important areas first and work your way down the list. Every area needs an action plan. What are you going to do to control things? And that's what we're going next. What's your action? Then you need to look at how do you prep? What's the action to be taken? Who's going to do it? And when are they going to do it by? Report completion on your action plan or to the task force. You want to keep your task force up to date on how are things going, because it's going to take effort, a level of effort to get ready. And again, document to communicate to everybody involved, to help with your training, and to memorialize the material. Your documentation is your audit trail. If you think about when we're in financial audit situations, we always want to keep our working papers. We want someone to come who is going to judge our decisions. You want them to be able to come back in and understand our thinking at the time. So that means documentation. Write it all down. Make it really clear why you're making the decisions you are. So you're protecting your employees. You're creating a safe workplace. That's what your obligation is as an employer under WorkSafe, is to create a safe workplace. So safety is paramount. And we're going to talk about both physical safety and the mental health and psychological safety of your staff. And I'm going to give you a hierarchy of controls. Now this comes straight out of WorkSafe. This is what they use as the guideposts for, are things safe and how do you reduce risk? So any area that we're talking about, you always want to keep your hierarchies of control in mind. And this is what they look like. So you have 4 hierarchies of control, ranging from most effective to least effective. The first is elimination or substitution. So as you're doing your workforce planning and as you're looking at your business, you need to ask yourself, do people actually need to come back to the office? Do they need to come to work? Maybe they can work from home and you can eliminate the risk altogether because the risk is at the office and they're at home. Maybe you can reduce the risk for a portion of your workplace that way. If you can't work from home and you have to bring them into the office, then you need to look at your engineering controls. So engineering controls are physical barriers, physical things. We're seeing these in grocery stores. This is your plexiglass that's being put up between cashiers and customers. We're seeing it in single-person trucks. You used to see construction trucks or work trucks with a couple of workers. Now there's only one. Wiping down grocery carts before they're moving from one person to the next. We're going to talk about what engineering controls you can do in workplaces. Administrative controls are things like cleaning and disinfecting, so enhancing your cleaning and disinfecting policies and process. But it's also things like your policies about no more visitors on site, no more in-person meetings, no sharing of equipment. So things that are policy-oriented, documentation-oriented, and training that you can do that helps continue to manage the risk. Then you'll notice the bottom of the list is actually personal protective equipment, or PPE. And there's a lot of media about PPE and the inability to get PPE. And you have to think about PPE is really important for those that are right up front and close to the virus. Your healthcare workers, people who are really at high risk because they're in the environment where the virus exists. In your workplaces, PPE are less helpful if you haven't done these other things like physical distancing and enhanced cleaning. So starting with elimination, can people work from home, and working your way down to, you know, the physical barriers like PPE. So if you keep those hierarchies of control in mind, let's talk about where your physical safety needs to be looked at. So things that you might need to consider are your building itself, your individual work areas, common work areas like kitchens and break rooms, washrooms, and actually outside the actual workplace, like your employee's home, which is now becoming a part of your responsibility as an employer because employees are working while they're at home. So remember to examine your spaces with a transmission lens. What needs to be addressed to manage transmission from close contact with people or contaminated surfaces? So this is a list. I won't go through them all, but this is a list of things that you can do. So you've seen this and you've heard of this in other places. Floor marking, one-way directions in hallways, propping doors open so you don't have to touch door handles, posting signage explaining the business rules so that you're educating as you go, always making sure people are keeping the rules in mind. Again, it's all about the transmission lens. Plexiglass in between desks or at reception. When you have your individual work areas, this is where transmission is possible from people more likely. So here's where your physical distancing comes into play. It's also where you want to have your enhanced cleaning measures. Hand sanitizer at every station, no sharing of equipment, cleaning equipment constantly, and no in-person meetings, no sharing offices, staggering your shifts. Always thinking about how do we lower contact with people, how do we physically distance, and how do we clean? How do we remove the virus from the surfaces? Your common areas as well, stairways, elevators, washrooms, reception desks, shared printers. Think about, you know, you go to the shared printer, you print your stuff, you use the stapler that's at the shared printer. That area has now had a lot of people contact. That's an area that needs to be looked at. How do you remove the sharing of things? So all the same principles apply. And of course, you need to be consistently reminding people to wash their hands. And it feels weird that, you know, in society today as adults, we need to be reminded to wash our hands, but it is proving to be a huge component to what keeps people safe. Put up posters, put up signage, make sure people are clear on the importance of hand washing. You also need to make sure you have proper amounts of soap, that you have paper towels versus hand towels, that you've got disposable areas to throw things away so that after they've washed their hands, they stay clean. So your garbage can has to have a pedal so that the lid pops open. They don't have to touch anything to throw away their paper towel. You need to think in very pedantic and very step-by-step ways on all the things associated with touching surfaces. Okay, so we've talked about safety at work. Now let's talk about the fact that you now have a new workplace to manage as an employer, and that's the employee's workplace at home. So if you have employees working at home, then you have to have a level of intervention or support to employees because they're at home. You've seen the acronym WFH for work for home policy or work from home, and it's about having policies. So there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind specifically to WorkSafe BC regulations associated with working at home. You need to have a policy about what does it mean to work at home, what's the employer's expectations. The employee is required to do a safety assessment of their home and to document that and to provide information to the employer about anything that could be a potential risk for the employee. You as an employer need to document in policy how an employee is to report a workplace injury if the workplace injury occurs at home. Think about ergonomics in particular, especially because, you know, we send people home in March thinking this is 2 weeks. We're gonna be at home for 2 weeks and then you can come back. Well, our office at Engaged HR, we're heading into week 9 at home. So the solutions that we sent people home with thinking it was 2 weeks may not still be okay at week 9. So think about, is your employee working on a dining room chair, or did they take their chair home from work? Do they have the proper equipment to do a good job in their work every day? Do they have the proper lighting? All the things that you would pay attention to in the workplace, at their cubicle or in their office, you need to pay attention to those same things in their home. And you need to write it down. You need to document it. The other thing that we may not have thought about before as it relates to work from home is that some people are actually alone at home. We've spent a lot of time talking about people who have spouses and children, and kids aren't in school, and so they would much rather come to work because home is chaotic and hard to work in. We also have employees that are working alone, and so there's a whole working alone policy that kicks in from WorkSafe BC, where you need to have a policy where there's check-ins that are happening, and that they're having a check-in procedure is mandatory. You need to conduct well-being checks. So you can't send your person home for and say, okay, I'll call you in 2 weeks for our regular one-on-one, and then never talk to them again. You need to do well-being checks and make sure that they're okay. And you need to have a procedure if the employee doesn't check in. If you don't hear from them in whatever period of time you've determined to be appropriate based on the level of risk that they're in, what do you do if they don't check in? And at a bare minimum, make sure that you have up-to-date emergency contact info. So if you can't get a hold of someone, can you get a hold of someone who might have had contact with your employee, even if you can't reach them? Things that we probably haven't really thought about before. So we've talked about physical safety, both at the workplace and in the new workplace, the employee's living room, the employee at home. Before I move off the work from home policy, actually, I will mention we do have another webinar that Ari mentioned at the beginning later this week about work from home policy and about mental health and employee well-being. So let's talk about employee well-being, because that's a big part of what the pandemic is bringing to the forefront. Mental health has always been important, and it's always had a level of challenge to talk about. It's becoming much more common to talk about the fact that this is a difficult time. The pandemic has brought up emotions that we are not used to dealing with, and maybe not even have experienced before. Never mind actually having someone at work talk about it or addressing it. And it's our obligation as caring and concerned managers and employers to really pay attention to this. In doing some research on this, realized that 40% of Canadians are acknowledging mental health challenges in the last month. And typically, 20% of Canadians would acknowledge having experienced a mental health challenge. So it's double. People are worried about their finances and their potential job loss as a result of COVID. And one primary driver of their stress is fear of contracting the virus, either themselves or a family member. And this comes from the Mental Health Commission of Canada report, and I do have a link to this report in the resources at the end. So stressful times call for additional care and attention, more than you would normally do. And I just want to point out, if the main driver of stress is contracting the virus, then communicating more than you ever have before about what you're doing to prevent transmission helps get straight to that driver of the stress for people. So it can be a much more effective tool when you think about why you're communicating, if you know it's to help them manage their psychological safety. Because people are afraid. So how do you address the fear? You need to educate on the measures that are required, what you need to do, and how you've met those requirements, so that they know that you're not making this up. You've done your research and you know this is what you need to do, and you're doing it. You need to implement mandatory training on all safety measures. We are all responsible for the efforts it takes to keep this virus from taking hold. And so we need to know what we're responsible for. We have to be trained. And you need to make it mandatory. People cannot just kind of dismiss this as, oh, that doesn't affect me. That's not about me. And we are all a part of this. Signage is a helpful reminder, and it also builds confidence that others will know what to do as well. So signage helps me, but it also reminds me that other people are seeing it too and will do this. So it helps minimize my fear. Keep the lines of communication open. Make sure employees know, what do they do if they feel something isn't being followed? How do they address that? This helps manage conflict amongst team members if they know they have a place to go. Do they go to the task force? Do they come to a particular person? Do they fill out a form? If it's high risk, how do they deal with it immediately? And it could be inadvertent, and it could be something that someone is just not paying attention. And you want to communicate internally what you're doing, but it's also helpful to communicate externally. As much as our employees are feeling fear, so are the people that we are serving. And so if your staff feel comfortable that the measures you've put in place are the ones that are going to help protect them, then they'll impart that to customers. And if customers know what you're doing and you post signage and maybe send out communications to your clients, if they're coming into your physical space, shopping or whatever your store might be about or your business might be about, then they'll feel comfortable in that, and they will give that vibe to your staff as well. So it helps just keep the spiraling of fear to a minimum. Now you need to have more common check-ins with your staff. You need to ask questions and really listen, and give opportunity to employees to have a voice. I encourage you to post information. If you have an employee assistance program or an EAP program, post the information. Make it really easy for employees to find that 1-800 number so they don't have to ask. You think back to that survey we did or found that there's 40% of Canadians have acknowledged they've had a mental health challenge. We also know that people don't easily acknowledge mental health challenges. So if 40% are acknowledging it, then we know the number is much higher of people that aren't acknowledging it. So don't make people ask for help. Make it easy for them to find those. Make it easy for them to take part in wellness activities, whether it's a Zoom yoga class or Zoom happy hour with some people, or something that is giving people a way to manage their health and their wellness, both their physical health and wellness, but also their mental health. If you can, provide information to parents to help navigate the realities of there being no school right now while everyone's at home. And manage expectations on performance and productivity, especially given that people may be in very chaotic situations at home and they might have toddlers running around for the day. So let's talk a bit about that. How do you manage absenteeism and productivity when you're bringing people back into work? So in some cases, employees are absent or they're unproductive, and you need to look for ways to support them. First, you need to determine the legitimacy of are they right? If they say, I'm not coming to work because it's unsafe, you need to identify, is that actually true? Is it unsafe? Have we missed something in the environment, and that they're right? So you need to explore the why. Why do they feel it's unsafe? Because then that helps you identify how you can fix it. If, generally speaking, they're absent or they're unproductive because it's a difficult time, there's lots of things that you need to look at, whether it's your paid sick time or vacation time, whether you're looking at providing them with unpaid leave of absence on a protected COVID job leave, or if you're accommodating. And that accommodation might be a medical accommodation, or it might be something more informal. So I've heard great stories about people who are, allowing a changing of hours of work to balance. I'm going to work in the morning and I work at night, and I'm going to take the day off because I've got kids I'm managing, or staggering shifts to manage childcare, or workers coming together with other families, kind of combining their bubbles, we'll say, of contact, so that they can play off childcare morning and afternoon while people go to work. So it's finding different ways to manage within the constraints and the challenges of COVID and physical distancing and keeping our bubbles tight, while also allowing people to really get creative about how they come to work and how they be productive. And we have to manage our expectations of how much productivity is realistic to expect. How much absenteeism can we allow and pay people? Again, it goes back to people won't call in sick if they don't feel they're going to be able to feed their families. So we need to look at the pay associated. Every situation and every employer is going to have a different set of criteria, capacity to offer to employees as we go through. So as I say, I know that this is going to relate to your individual situation and your business, but it's things to keep in mind. So let's talk a little bit about your business. I want you to kind of put some scrutiny eyes on your business right now, and I want you to think about some of the things that are going to make a difference in your business. As HR professionals, you know, we always look at both the people side, but there is also the business side, and so we want you to think about both. So let's talk about business continuity and sustainability. The first thing is you need to create a succession plan and a continuity plan if you haven't already done so. We have a great resource on our website that is a giant checklist of all the things you need to think about associated with a lot of these areas. But some of the key highlights are things like, do you have a plan if a key position gets sick? If your payroll person gets sick and can't run payroll anymore, what are you going to do? If you get sick, what are you going to do? Do you have cross-training? Especially given that we've been given lots of warning that there could be likely a second wave where we go back into a lockdown of some kind or isolation of some kind. So get ready. How can you prepare for that with permanent work from home models or some cross-training? You also need to do some financial planning. Your wage subsidy, taking a look at all of the components associated with that, and ensuring you have financial resources to manage lower sales, less profitability, a longer sales cycle, maybe tighter cash flow. You need to scenario build basically for the next 12 to 24 months. What does your financial plan look like? What's your succession plan? What's your workforce plan? You need to do a lot of that deeper diving into, which I realize is very difficult, elements of not necessarily knowing what is coming up. We don't know what the fall looks like, but we can make some assumptions, and we can worst case scenario, we can best case scenario, and then we can most likely scenario. So this is where, as we head into the summer and we perhaps get into a little bit of a settling of what do things look like in the first lightening of restrictions, this is a good time to do some planning. And this is definitely an area that we can help you with. I also want to remind people to manage your legal liability and risk on all fronts. We've been very focused today on the safety side and on some workforce planning. There's lots of other legislations beyond the Workers' Compensation Act and regulations that you need to consider and pay attention to. You do need to keep the Employment Standards Act in mind. You need to look at, in BC, the Personal Information Protection Act. And this I highlight for temperature screening. And the reason I bring up temperature screening is because that's in the news a lot. It's not an area that I can speak confidently about. I don't have a lot of experience with this, but I will say taking an employee's temperature is equivalent to a drug test. We don't do drug testing in Canada unless you're in a safety sensitive position and you're at risk and the safety is very high. If we get into temperature screening, we have to be very careful. How are we collecting that information? What are we doing with that information? What exposure is the employer taking on by taking people's temperatures? So it's an area to keep very close an eye on. If it's something that you're going to implement, I would strongly suggest that you get legal advice on how to manage that process. The other one I wanted to bring up was the Human Rights Act. Currently, you know, we have not been in a COVID environment long enough for there to be any tribunal responses associated with how employers have been dealing with employees who are ill with COVID-19. But the BC Human Rights Commissioner did release a paper or a position around that she anticipates that COVID-19, that being ill, being someone who actually has COVID-19, would actually be considered a disability. So being very careful around terminations, around recall, around anything that could put you at risk of being in contravention of the Human Rights Act because of how you manage someone who was ill with COVID. As we get into many months from now, when people start to see tribunal decisions on things, months and years away, you'll want to be on the right side of that act. So that's business continuity and sustainability. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is, or the second to last actually, you've done all of this work, you've sanitized everything you possibly can, and you're bringing people back to work, and the employee still says, I'm not coming. I refuse, I don't feel safe. You need to ask questions. What is it that makes them feel unsafe? Because it is very much a case-by-case scenario, and it really depends on the reason why. You need to communicate what you've done to make it safe. and really understand what is it for them, like what makes it unsafe for them, and then help them understand what you've done to deal with that particular thing. Maybe it's, maybe you don't realize that they're required to share headsets and you thought they all had their own headsets and they don't. Okay, that you can fix that. So really get curious. And if once they give you some information about what makes it unsafe, you need to investigate it. And that's a WorkSafe BC requirement. You have to investigate the claim. The workplace is unsafe. And that's another whole webinar on how to do that, but you do need to investigate. Now, if it's not about the workplace, you need to identify perhaps you can accommodate, because sometimes it's something else. It's not about the workplace, but it's about the bus I have to take to get to work. Or it's not about the workplace, but I care for an elderly grandparent at home, and so I'm worried about what that means when I get home. So you need to communicate and look at how can you accommodate. So again, it goes back to maybe they aren't someone that needs to come to work. Maybe their job already can be done from home. Or maybe you need to take a look at, putting them on an unpaid leave because of the COVID protected leave is available to them because of caring for someone who is elderly at home. You need to really understand their specific situation, and it is very much case by case. And so getting some help for that, whether it's from an HR professional like ourselves or from a lawyer, but you do need to explore. You get really curious and then communicate your options. Talk to them about the options they have available to them, the consequences of not returning to work, whether that's, as I say, unpaid leave, accommodation, quitting, or termination. So it is an area that is complicated and does take a real curious mind to understand how do you best deal with a refusal. So this is the final thing I'm going to say. Documentation. I talked about this at the beginning. I'm going to talk about it now. Document everything. What you've done, why you've done it, who you trained, how you calculated your wage subsidy, anything that could be audited, anything that will prove how you've done things. How did you make your decisions? So that if you were audited by the federal government, by WorkSafe BC, by the provincial government, by a human rights tribunal, you have everything you need documented. You also are starting the development of how you're going to deal with things if there's a second wave, how you would deal with things if something else were to happen. So it's a great time to start developing your pandemic toolkit for your organization. So it's a great legacy tool as well. Okay. I'm just going to quickly mention resources because I quoted a few things here. So BC Centre for Disease Control is where we get the symptoms and such. The one thing I will talk about that was a great guide that I found is the one at the bottom here, Cushman Wakefield, Recovery Readiness, a how-to guide for reopening your workplace. Cushman Wakefield is, they are, I don't know what the word is, property managers, I guess. It's a great guide for taking a look at your building, taking a look at the mechanics of it, but also some great resources on people side as well, and having people back into buildings. So I found a lot of great resources there, so I just thought I'd share that with you. It's a free download on their website. So when you get the PowerPoint slides from us and the recording, you can find that. You could also probably just Google that as well. Okay, I feel like I just talked a mile a minute there. We are ready to take your questions. And I do just want to say, I really want to tell this guy to stop touching his face, because this is the big new thing. Don't touch your face. So I'm going to pass it back to Ari, and he is going to moderate for us questions, and then I will give you the best I can for the last 15 minutes that we have here.
Thank you, Denise. I appreciate that. And wow, that is a lot of information to absorb. So thank you, everyone, for sticking with us through this presentation. To ask a question, just ask that you click on the Q&A button. You'll find that there is a Q&A excuse me, button at the bottom of your Zoom screen itself. If you have a question, you simply click on the Q&A button, and it'll open up a new window for you to ask any questions that you might have regarding the topics of the day. And first question is from Carolyn Fast. Denise, you mentioned the resource tool for business continuity plan. Where is that located?
Did I? Well, I think the one I most recently mentioned is on our website. right at the very beginning of the pandemic, we issued a release that was a checklist of all the things you need to think about when it comes to addressing and planning.
Yeah.
Almost before a pandemic hits, but there's all the things in it that you need to take a look at. So Ari, that would be on the blog page of our website, correct?
Correct. It would be actually on the blog page, also be on the COVID-19 resource page of our website. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see quite a large amount of blogs and memos that we've issued over the past 8 weeks. Right at the bottom, I think one of the first things we've done was create this checklist for organizations to better plan ahead for any sort of pandemic or event like a pandemic. And I think you'll find that to be very beneficial. It's a complete checklist right through that. You can also just search our website through a pandemic checklist plan or something along those lines, and you'll find results this way as well. We're going to be providing, like Denise mentioned, all the resources that we utilized for creating this presentation will be available to you as well once we send out the video, as well as the slide deck too. Thanks, Carolyn. Does anyone else have any questions about the presentation this morning? You're welcome, Carolyn.
I know it was a lot of information in a really short period of time, so.
There is a lot of information in a short period of time, yes. And I believe someone, Broden Ganap, apparently just sent a chat message with a link on our website to that pandemic HR checklist. Thank you for that, Broden. That'd be great. You can navigate there directly through that. I'm going to. There's a question from Susan Smitten who's posting it to the chat window, and I'm just going to ask Susan. Obviously, I'm going to ask the question, but please, for everyone, do use the Q&A window as opposed to the chat window because we're typically not monitoring the chat window. But Susan was asking, is there a safety assessment checklist for employees working from home?
Not specifically that I'm aware of. Others may be aware of where I would go for that would be to WorkSafe, and we can do a bit of digging and see if we can find a particular safety assessment checklist, or perhaps put one together for you. But it would be through the WorkSafe regulations. Everybody's work site at home, like every workstation, is different. The biggest things to keep in mind are ergonomics. Are they sitting properly? But also, do they have a proper table or desk that they're working on? Do they have, I do know in the materials I looked at, do they have a safe way to exit their building, wherever they live? If there was a fire or if there was, an emergency, could they easily get out of the workplace, out of the house? And then the other thing I saw around that also was associated with if they're on home alone and working alone, do they have someone in close proximity that can help them? So I'll look back to the slides and the websites that I looked to for that, and we can add that as well to our email out that we'll send you afterwards.
Thanks.
It's also a great blog, so I'll do a blog on that as well.
And one of our associates, Leslie, actually just posted a link to the WorkSafe website regarding health, safety responsibilities when working from home. You can see that link in the Q&A window itself, and you can just copy and paste that link into a browser and probably get a lot of more really useful information directly from the WorkSafe BC website as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie.
I also want to say that it ties really well into our webinar on Thursday. This working from home is a very complicated area, and that's why we decided to dedicate an entire hour for it, because not only are there ergonomic considerations, there are also mental health considerations. Keep in mind that in your workplace, so how does that, working from home, how does bullying and harassment apply from home? What's the employer's responsibilities to employees' well-being, psychological well-being at home as well? Those are the kind of topics we're going to be talking in great more detail on Thursday in that webinar, because it really presents itself as a whole new body of knowledge and information for everyone working in HR right now. I'm just going to proceed to the next question from Kim. Any thoughts on how long to keep records, specifically daily employee fitness to work balancing privacy concerns? So how long do you need to keep that kind of information about health of employees. You mentioned, for example, Denise, temperature checks, etc. Anything else in that regard?
So I would follow employment standards on in just your employee records associated with, which I believe is 4 years. And then if there's anything you're tying into your payroll records, like your paid leave and things like that, then you would follow the CRA rules for how long you maintain your financial records. And certainly the subsidy calculations, how you calculated your subsidy for what you claimed, would follow CRA rules for maintaining raw payroll records.
Wonderful, thank you. I just want to mention that there's also a link to Government of BC resource that Shelley Carlson added to the Q&A section. Thank you for that, Shelley. I'm not sure if everyone can see all those links, but if you can't see those links, we'll be sure to include them when we send out the links to the video recording and the slide deck as well, to make sure that you all have access to this information as well. Barb Webster asked a similar question. If there are any templates for working from home policies that we can use to start with?
I haven't seen a lot of templates, but some of our staff may have, as they've been doing a lot more of that direct work right now. So if, I know some of our staff are on the call as well. So if anybody's got anything and want to put it in the chat or the Q&A box, that'd be really helpful. The thing to keep in mind with your work from home policy is that it needs to fit the style and flow of all your other policies so that it has longevity for you. But it is something that, as I said, I saw a couple chats there. I don't know if some of the staff have chimed in. Sorry, it was a work from home templates that you were looking for.
A template, yeah, a policy template. And yeah, certainly that is something I think that a lot of organizations are going to be scrambling to get a hold of over the coming weeks and months. And like Denise mentioned, it's you know, there's obviously a lot of information that would be applicable to all organizations, but there's a lot of also very specific case-specific information that you would want to consider when you're crafting a new work from home policy for your own organizations. And of course, at any time, if you need a hand, we'll be here to help as well. The next question is from Barb. If a staff person, sorry, I'm going to restart the question. If a staff person is to ensure that their home space is ergonomically correct, how does the employer know that it is done correctly without inspecting it?
Well, interestingly, this was something that came up on a WorkSafe webinar that I participated in, and the WorkSafe consultant indicated two things. One was to make sure that you have really good instructions for employees, so you know that you don't just say do an ergonomic check, but you provide them with a map of, well, what am I looking for? You know, the way that your arms need to be situated, the feet on the ground, you know, all the different things. So maybe it's visual things that you get from WorkSafe about what ergonomics look like. The other was suggested that you do a video call with your employee and you get them to show you. So, you know, get them to show sitting at the desk or sitting on the chair, use their phone and video things as best they can, so that there is some level of evaluation that the employer is doing, even though they're not going into the employees' homes. They were pretty clear that that's not pragmatic or practical at this point, but the employer does need to do best efforts. So I would do those two things, and then I would also get the employee to sign an acknowledgement form that they've done their best effort to assess their ergonomics and that they don't have any ergonomic needs at this time. That might change over time depending on how long we are working at home, but I would try those two things. Really be specific in your education to the employee and what are they assessing, and then if you can, do a video to have them show you.
Thank you, the next question actually I think is one that is on top of mind for many individuals, many organizations right now, and that is, do you have any advice on for how to respond to employees who request to stay working remotely, and once investigated, the reasons are not substantiated or justifiable?
Yeah, this is a big one, and this is one that, again, there's a level of case by case to this, because if they're strictly saying the workplace is not safe, and so I want to work from home, then you need to decide whether or not you want to pursue the ending of their employment, or putting them on a leave, or you need to look at all the different options associated. Is it really critical that they come to work? Can they work from home? The government's been pretty clear. If people can work from home, they want them to stay home. While we're bringing people back to work, it doesn't necessarily mean you're bringing them back into the office if you don't need to. And so that, I think, is your first question, is it necessary to bring them back? And if it is necessary to bring them back, then you have to outline to them all the different ways that it has been maintained, all the different things that you have done to ensure that the workplace is safe, and then make it clear to them that the expectation is that they return to work. If they still refuse to return to work, then according to WorkSafe, you then need to move down there's a 4-step process to the investigation, and you would need to move through those 4 steps. And so then you have to you have to show the employee, so you have to have the employee with you, virtually by video or physically with you, to examine the unsafe nature that they consider of the workplace to be unsafe, and then ask them again to return to work. If they still refuse, you then need to involve WorkSafe, because they're refusing for safety reasons. It is WorkSafe needs to be involved. If it's I'm refusing because I enjoy working at home better, and working at home I get more done, and so I feel more productive, so I'd like to stay home, it's a whole different reason. But if it's about safety, then you have to go down the investigative path with WorkSafe, which has a much more rigor to it as you progress down the steps.
Certainly a very complicated scenario, like Denise mentioned, definitely a case by case. And one question to ask yourself also, is this really a fight that you want to undertake? If this individual is able to work from home effectively without any loss of productivity, and there's no negative impact on the organization, is this really something that you want to actually pursue? That's obviously a very individual decision for each and every organization to make.
Yeah.
I want to thank everyone for providing us with some additional links as well in the Q&A page. I'm going to be copying those links and adding them to the resources that we'll be sending out. we just have about a couple of minutes left, and there's no other questions in the Q&A right now. So I'm going to move on to the thing that everyone has been waiting for the most. All of you have been spending the last hour for us, obviously, wanting to give us feedback. So our next poll is our feedback poll. So I'm just going to pop it on the screen right now and share it with you. And we're just going to ask you for your anonymous feedback about how this webinar was, whether it was helpful or not. This really helps us provide you with better content and better information going forward. So we really do appreciate you participating. So I'm just going to pop open the poll, relaunch polling, continue. That's the wrong poll, so let me try and a different poll. There we go. And now, there we go. So I'm going to keep that poll open for the next 60 seconds. We would love to hear back from you. And while you're filling the poll, I'm just going to remind you about our upcoming webinars. The Thursday one is especially kind of a deep dive into working at home and the mental aspect of that. Very important topic. I highly recommend that you either attend or sign up so you can receive a copy of the webinar itself later on as well. And on the 26th, we'll be taking an approach of looking at COVID-19 challenges through the lens of the not-for-profit organizations that we serve on a day-to-day basis. So if you are the not-for-profit sector, I do recommend that you join that webinar as well. I think you'll find it very informative and very specific to your sector as well. And of course, we just want to say thank you, taking an hour of your time this morning, attending this webinar. We sincerely hope it was very helpful. Do reach out to us, info@engagehr.com with any questions or anything else that you might have, any ideas for future webinars as well. We'd glad to hear that. And expect an email this afternoon or first thing tomorrow morning with a link to the video, so you can download and view the video directly through either a website or through YouTube, and a copy of the slide deck and additional resources and links for you to consider. I see now we've got 96% of people have voted already. Very much thank all of you for participating. I want to wish you a terrific rest of your day, and I want to thank Denise for taking the time this morning to share her bounty of knowledge with all of us. Thank you, Denise. Thank you to everyone else as well. I'm going to end the polling, and then I'm going to end the webinar. And wish you all a wonderful rest of the week. Stay safe.
Thank you all, everyone.
We'll see you next time.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.